Casual Magic has been sponsored by Quiver, maker of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine deck holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their website for 10% off your order. We're also sponsored by Architect, the premier site for hosting your decks on the internet. I love them and they love me, and it seems like a good reason for you to use them. You can also support Casual Magic directly by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/ShivamB. And now, on with the show. Cool. Do me a favor and talk a smidge.
Yeah, tonight we cooked tofu and broccoli and potatoes for dinner, and I had some water, sparkling water.
Oh, that's amazing. I made potato leek soup, and it tasted phenomenal.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it was just like, oh man, it's hella good, dude. Because you have to rice the potatoes in a food mill so they don't get starchy, and it ended up being sublime. So
I think about you every time I cook because of how much you love cooking and how much you love the relationship between like spirit and food, and also just like the material quality of food. So I thought of you tonight, especially because I'm vegetarian.
Yeah.
Every time I learn how to like cook a new way of tofu, there's a lot of like a little small reminders that always take me back to like our conversations or you as a person. I'm like, this is Shivam's jam, you know. Like my wife has decided.
Hang on, let me actually formally start the show.
Oh yeah,
well, I might actually just keep that because that's lovely. But hello and welcome to God damn it. Off my game already. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam Bhatt, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Architect and Quiver and my patrons at patreon.com/ShivamB. Today I am joined by one of my dear friends, a man I haven't had on my show for years now, it feels like. And that, you know, I got to share maybe my favorite Commander game of all time with, and also you're just like literally such a legend that getting you to talk at any event we're at is now not possible anymore, which it just, I don't know, makes me sad, but I'm just glad we're able to have this moment now, man. Thank you for joining me. Oh yeah, I should say Rhystic Studies, Sam, you've heard his voice. You know who he is. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Shivam. So glad to be here. It's always nice to chat with you. And yeah, you have to coordinate chats now. Maybe you read my post from last year on Substack. I wrote about how like years ago, we used to just all be able to hang out in a room together without any fanfare or whatever. We were the fans, you know, at these conventions. Decidedly the Las Vegas convention I pointed to where I believe, it was that same convention where I took yours and Gavin's photos that's now been recreated at every time you see him. So it was that
photo.
Yeah, it was that photo.
Maybe the most important photo I take every year. It's maybe my favorite. Honestly, Gavin and I just like, I saw him at Gen Con, which is not even a Magic Con. We were just hanging out and he's like, we got to take our photo. I'm like, here? And he's like, we're together, aren't we? And I'm like, you know what? That's a blessing I'm not going to say no to.
It's a great it's a memento now, but there's been years of it. So there is a timeline progression there, you know?
You can see us aging, but the joy just doesn't go away, man.
No doubt.
Because that first picture you took, for those of you who don't know, there's a picture that Sam took of me and Gavin Verhey at, I think, the first Vegas post the first wave of COVID.
No, this was before that. This was maybe 2019, maybe 2017. No, I think it must have been 2019. One of the two. It was a summertime one. It was Vegas, but it was summertime. So, and it wasn't the COVID one. So.
Yeah, it was pre-COVID because I know we did one after COVID where we had our masks on and everything. It was awesome. But yeah, like you took a picture of me and him just pointing at the audience with our arms outstretched. And it was just an exaltation of what it felt like to be at this con, right? Like to be surrounded by your people, to be in a space where I was telling somebody you can speak unfiltered and know that your language is being understood by the person you're talking to, no matter what. Like we could just sit there and say, man, I was just drawing the nuts, and they're like, yes, I totally understand, as opposed to someone else being like, what, walnuts? What? I don't understand what's going on. You know? And ever since then, it's just become a testament to our friendship that Gavin and I will just remake that picture wherever we are. And I think that's delightful, man.
Yeah,
it's so joyful.
No. Yeah, it's great. It's great to see the lineage of that keep going. One thing really quick, I'm not seeing my audio waves on the.
I am. Don't worry about it.
You are. Hell yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's great to see that photo live on. I like the ripple effect that it's created, and it's become a tradition for both of you, and a moment of joy. Like, all right, the con officially happened. Shivam and Gavin are. We have to like name that pose. I mean, I assume Gavin one day will turn it into a. That would be a sweet like partner, like mystery. What are they called? The mystery.
Yeah, the mystery Gavin's unknown event type of card.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just
partner with like the other half, Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you even call that? It's just exuberance, right? It's just joy. It's like overwhelming is what it is sometimes. But
no doubt.
People like, it's funny because like people even just stop when we're taking those pictures and they're just like, oh, they're doing the thing. And I'm like,
yep.
But it's wild though, because like you were saying that it's become difficult for us like to even just hang out and talk. Like I know I saw our dear friend the Prof on the way to like the con, and he had got guys around him, big Guidos who were just walking around and stuff. And I just saw him in passing, and I'm like he had a signing which had thousands of people and was capped an hour before it even started, type of thing. Expected, he deserved it, wonderful. But as like a person who's been his friend for like 15, 20 years or whatever, I'm like, I have to say hi and ask the security guard to pass it on to the other security guard to wave to get Brian to look at me. And I'm like, that's just, I guess, the world we live in.
He is, not that he's accosted, but there's no moment of silence or moment of pause for him at those events now. I've seen it in action. I also said hi to him in passing a couple of times at the previous Chicago I think he was at. So, but yeah, it's just a different ecosystem, because 5, 6, 7 years ago that wasn't the case, and it's become its own thing. I can't speak much to it. I wrote that blog post about it, just kind of reflecting on how there's video footage, and there was video footage of maybe it was Graham's vlog or James' vlog or whomever actually had the footage of us at this commander party. And you could probably like pause at any moment of that video and recognize someone who is quote unquote famous now. And it's just all of us in a room, like
would never happen.
Yeah. So it's all shifted. I mean, the whole ecosystem has changed, and everybody has their role in it. But the result is that, like you're saying, you have to say hi for 5 seconds.
Because I remember like last year I wanted to introduce you to my wife at Chicago, and I saw you in passing. Like, hi, Sam. And you're like, hi.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, no hard feelings, because I understand. Because I'm like, dude, this year was a very surreal moment for me, because I finally got Diana to let me have a signing spot, and I was like, okay, cool, that'll be fun. And the way Chicago was set up, creator badges didn't let you get in early. They were just in the general queues. So by the time I got to my signing, there was a line 20 people deep. And I was like, who are you waiting for? And they're like, you. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's awesome. Gosh, that's super cool. That's the best part. Yeah, those are the realest ones, the ones who are taking time out of their con to come say hi to you.
It is. There was a kid who came to me and Wheeler last year when we did in Chicago, we did our panel, and this kid came up to us, and his mom was there with him. And this kid is like, autistic and on the spectrum and has certain like difficulties relating with people, but he memorizes magic cards a lot. And he's fully versed. He's memorized every card. And he's like, his mom was like, Ben likes to listen to you two because you two speak the same language that he does, and it makes him feel less alone. And I'm like, that's incredible. And he gave me this binder of monsters that he had hand drawn of all these weird cryptids and everything like that. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. This is amazing. What's going on? Well, this year they wanted to see me, but because of reasons we couldn't get together. But they found Wheeler at his signing, and this kid went and had made individual tokens, hand-drawn tokens of his little cryptids of specific creature types that he knows that I like to use.
Cool. Gosh, they're very clear too. Look at the very recognizable iconic graphic. Look at that. Perfect.
Yeah, it's so good. Boom. And I was just like, and for Wheeler, he made tokens that are only made off of one card in Magic. So some random O2 plant or some random ox
Those
token
are
or whatever the hell
like
it is. Right?
The Ophiomancer token, right? The one
yeah, exactly. And I was like, that is somebody who's paying attention and is also just like That's the most adorable thing ever.
Amazing.
And then his older sister made this for me based on the thing I did at the PPR, which is
wow.
And I just started weeping, and I was like, what do you want me to do? Like,
Yep.
I just talk about magic cards, man.
I know. Yeah, you don't know your reach until they're telling you, like, hey, yeah, I have similar stories. There's so many. I mean, the best recurring one is like, hey, my mom or my partner doesn't play Magic. This is the only way I could get them to understand why I care about it so much. They watch your videos or whatever, and that's always like, that's a huge compliment, because when you speak the same language as Magic players, not that we take that for granted, but that's the expectation at the con. You're around a lot of like-minded folks who know what you mean when you say snap, bolt, snap, whatever.
Right.
But it's a different thing when someone says like, hey, someone in my life doesn't understand this at all. This is like impenetrable from the outside, but through your whatever you make, they have an idea now, or even that they like it. Like that's always like the best, you know?
Yeah. Even my wife, who's got like passing knowledge of Magic, but she's obviously not like in this world the way I am. She'll watch your videos with me and be like, oh, look, the artistry or the thing that you're covering, whatever this theme is, I think that's what I appreciate about you the most, is your ability to take a point in time or a point in a card or something and expand it into just this exploration of whatever this art is at the time. And that's just like, I'm a big fan of deep dives anyways. Like yesterday, I read this amazing article about the history of pencils in Japan.
Cool.
Which I think I might have even sent it to you. If not, I'll send it to you later. But it is absolutely just two companies going back and forth and like competing for 100 years to become the best pencil manufacturers in Japan. I'm like, this is the kind of incredible esoterica I live for.
Yeah,
and I
that's
feel that,
very
like,
up your alley. That's super Shivam, man.
It is though. But like, dude, watching your video on the Zugzwang machine of like the friggin' Lantern of Insight, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That is as narrow a bolt as you can get into.
Oh yeah,
in Magic, right?
Yeah. I think that one is fun because that's a niche within a niche. Like that to me is kind of the deepest layer of like esoteric magic stuff that I can present, is that deck and the history of that deck through the research of that. I was like, okay, the videos are for me, they're for everyone, but the parts that I enjoy most are those like those aha moments in research where I find something out that I didn't know before. And I knew a lot about the Lantern deck because I kind of watched it develop in real time. I watched that GP match live between Elsic and BBD. So I remember vividly like typing in the chat, like, this is old school Magic. I can't believe we're watching this happen, you know? It
was so crazy. That was the first time when nobody knew what was going on, was just like, what is happening?
I know. And Marshall's like also discovering it in real time too. But the best part of like that research project was finding out that there had been years and years of forums and MTG Salvation discussing the kind of idea of the deck and the concept, the core concept. Like it had been going on behind the scenes for years and years. And there's a moment on like page 156, I marked it in my notes, where Zach Elsic enters the conversation for the first time, you know, and he's like, hey, have you tried, XYZ in the build or whatever? And you can watch like the entire history of that deck is in that thread that's still preserved.
So good, man.
Like, gosh, that is the best. Like that stuff for me, I read every single post in that like multi-thousand, you know? So
that's what I think. That's why I miss forums so much.
Oh yeah,
because everybody's moved to Discord and stuff. I'm like, no, Discord sucks because there's no history. There's no record of Discord. I've got like, there's a retro games forum that I've been on now since 2001 or 2. Like a forum where we went from like people in there are high schoolers to now grandparents type of like, we have been on this through it together. And I can see my thoughts on like every random thing that's happened that I've cataloged over decades. Or like, you know, there was a time when I was like, hey guys, I'm getting back into Magic. I found literally my first ever Commander game was on that forum. We were playing by post. Playing Commander by post is utterly weird. But it was like, hey, Shivam, you should check this format out. You can play your old Soul Ring and things. I'm like, what the hell is that? I haven't played Magic in a long time. Sure, why not? Lend me a deck. And 10 years later, I'm running Commander. What? Like, you can see this progression. Like, I miss having that, and like it. Think about what it does for your job. It
Yeah.
allows you to
Oh yeah.
delve in and build a record and tell a story.
Yeah,
And
that's a huge I'm running up against the fringes of that now with like the degradation of the internet, with like folks kind of splintering off of Twitter. Twitter for a long time was like a tertiary resource of just,
yeah,
you could see someone reacting to a deck and the quote tweets, and you find these, like I get very in the nitty gritty with that, but that's kind of eroding. Wizards kind of destroying their own back catalog. So
I will
like,
never ever stop being mad about
yeah,
them erasing. There's no that stuff took maybe 10, 20 megs total.
yeah, who knows? I mean, it's really hard to know what or why, what drove those decisions. If that was intentional, if that was kind of trying to like pull the rug over their past, who knows? I can't speak to it, but thank goodness for the moment, as of time recording. Shout out to Max Makes Magic, who has kept the archive of that
Oh
going. So I do
bless.
have access to all these old articles, and sometimes it's janky because you're missing the photographs that accompanied the words, but the
Yeah.
words are clear and they're presentable and read and legible. So, I think in Magic, yeah, I'm running into that where I have a lot of resources, but the internet, ultimately I use it as a tool for research, and
Mm.
it's 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 eroding and splintering into tons of subgroups, and now maybe we can't tell certain stories in Magic. That's true of every hobby. That's true of all information in general. We built
Mm.
the Library of Alexandria, and now we're burning it from within. You're just like taking one book at a time on purpose in some ways. So yeah, it's just a little bit. It's getting tougher
It's
and tougher to tell these stories and to keep track of them. So I put a call to action out of just like, we need some more, archivists of sorts, and
yeah.
like the BDMs of the world, like the official Pro Tour historian. Who is that going to be? Who is he passing the torch off to? Because someone has to do that, So,
Right.
and maybe we take it for granted, but like now, Magic's a multi-generational game, and we have folks whose offspring are entering the game and want some context as to how this was happened or how this kind of came to be. I see a lot of that with like dark spots in the history of the Pro Tour. Speaking of the Pro
Yeah.
Tour, it's just like I sat here really quick. I'll finish this thought with just last year at Chicago. I did my signing with BDM, and we sat there together, and the amount of people that knew who I was who didn't know who BDM was. Halfway through, he looked over at me. He's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "I have no idea, because I would be in line for your signing because
Right.
you are my like
Dude,
person,
when this happened, the weirdest thing in the world happened to me. I think it was either in Vegas or it was in Vegas. I was standing there and I was watching like John Finkel in the feature match playing, and I'm just like in awe. Like to this day, I've not introduced myself to him because I'm too scared to say hi to Finkel. Like I said hi to Kai in Amsterdam, and that was because someone's like, I'm going to drag you in front of him and force you to say hi. And I'm like, I can't say hi. That's Kai Buddha.
That's Kai.
But it was funny because I'm sitting there and I'm just like shivering because I'm like, oh my God, that's Finkel, that's Shuhei, and that's whatever. And some guy comes up and is like, holy shit, Shivam, can you sign this playmat for me? And I'm like, I'm basking right now. Can you wait a second?
Yeah.
It's so weird because like you're right. Like when I was at the PPR, I was like the first time I went to the PPR with Marshall and Aaron Campbell, I was like still kind of new to the community, and I was still kind of fresh and not really new, but I was still newer. And
Mhm.
now I'm like the elder statesman because like the person I was with, Callie, whose name is Magic New Girl online, she started playing in Phyrexia All Will Be One. And I'm like,
gotcha. That was last week.
Hell, of all the sets to start with,
I know.
Phyrexia?
I know. It's true I was teaching a course at UT before I finished grad school, and I asked on day one, I did a little 5-question survey just to get a feel out for the students in my class. I asked for their birthdays, and they came back, and it was like 2001, and it was that first moment of like, oh, right. There's a generational difference here. So
yeah.
And actually, Mike and I were talking about this, how, we're watching a new generation of folks come into the scene that are very new to the game and also new to the world, and also like aren't going to be on YouTube and aren't going to be, they're in their own like ecosystem fully. Like these are folks that are going to pave their own way in their own style, in their own form of media, and this like idea that you are if you are a YouTuber, that's what makes you like relevant or personality or important in the scene. It used to be the pros, the players that we admire, you know, the hardcore players.
Yeah.
And then it was like the YouTubers. And next it's going to be the folks who are doing all
Like
sorts of
the
stuff.
TikToks or the whatever,
Yeah.
anything. Yeah. I mean, like, I hate to when this show turns into like old man yells at cloud type of thing, because I'm just like, look, I'm here to. I'm glad that people younger than me care.
Oh,
right?
yeah. That's
like,
the best part. Right. You're right. That's a good point.
One of the things I noticed, like, I was talking to somebody at Chicago where it was like, I remember when I started coming to GPs, and it was literally all pros and a handful of like casual scrubs in the back and one booth or two.
Yep.
And now there's like whole families, kids, people pushing strollers, or little kids coming around and playing with their first Magic cards. And I'm like, this is the greatest. This is what could I possibly want more than seeing kids coming out here? And like, I mean, Tyler Walpole has his son in his booth helping him out. And I'm like, that's wild. That's so cool.
It is cool. It's cool. And it's a little bit of, I'm an old man that yells at all sorts of clouds of all sorts of shapes, you know, and sizes. So I know all about yelling at clouds, but the best part is that's the best way to frame it is what you just said. Like, young people care about this game and they're making it their own in the coolest way, in a way that we couldn't imagine or could not relate to perhaps. But again, that transcends Magic. That's true of everything.
I mean, like, I just celebrate it, right? Like, I'm just here. I'm just happy to see that if anybody cares or listens to this stuff, that's amazing. But even if you don't, like, it's so cool to see people just like finding the same joy that we did, or like discovering that Alana War Elves doesn't tap for a forest. It gives you a green mana.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. I get a huge kick out of that sort of thing. And then I'm like, so how did you learn to play? And they're like, oh yeah, my friend gave me like, you know, an Adnaz commander deck. I'm like, I can't play that deck. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, what is wrong with your friend?
Yeah, you'll like tease out the savants of Magic very early if your first experience is that sort of thing, and you're like, oh, I was at the ceiling when I arrived, not the floor, right? I started with M13. Like, this is a 5-mana bat with flying. So, you know.
And then they're like, yeah, I started with a full-on Doomsday pile. And I'm like,
right.
What are you doing?
So cool.
Oh my God.
So cool.
I don't know. That's why, like, one of the things I enjoy is when I throw down my decks and I play like my Homeland cards or cards from Masks or whatever. And people are like, what in the hell is going on? What is this?
Yeah, there's like rites of passage that will repeat. Folks will have to learn the same. There's like moments. The next video I'm working on is kind of just glimmers of that. It's a bit of a deconstruction of the stuff that I'm already doing in a way that I wanted to try, and it's a little bit new in terms of the format. But
I'm excited.
The central conceit is like, what I do for Rhystic Studies is I look at Magic cards, kind of what you were speaking about, do deep dives on specific Magic cards, and that always opens these caverns and pools of a story down there. So this is the reverse of that. That's like one Magic card can tell a story, the Zugzwang machine. Yes. What if I did just like 50 quick glances at 50 different Magic cards and hinted at the potential stories that could be told, you know?
I love that.
And a lot of these are like, these are cards that the old time Magic players will recognize, or stories or cultural moments in Magic that folks will like, if you were there, you'll know. And if you weren't there, you'll be curious about what this is. Because I think part of my joy, what you're describing earlier about the pencil story, is like, I love to peek my head into other subcultures, especially if I'm not involved in them.
Yes.
With some random, you know, deep dive video essay or article or whatever. And I get this like quick glimpse of an entire story about some Super Smash Brothers controller, or like shout out Magnet. Like, when Magnet told me about the dance community, the Dance Dance Revolution, and the dancing, you know, rhythm games community.
I was like, a DDR stan for 20 years, man.
Yes. Oh, I love DDR, but we were in the nitty gritty of like preferred shoes, you know, and stuff like that. To me is exactly the stuff that I love the most. Is like, there's a heated debate about which shoes are the best for this type of stuff, you know? So like, Magic has that in spades, but I think every other game niche
I
hobby
mean, you
has
and I
that,
both
you
have
know?
seen the history of the Tetris the Tetris World Hit Record, right?
I need to see it still. I haven't watched it still. I know.
Oh my God,
And
Sam, that is
I know. And I've been playing Tetris again recently. And I know you love Tetris Forever. It's another time I've thought of you recently. I'm like, I should play Tetris Forever. I'm like, Shivam loves Tetris
it
Forever.
does. I do.
Isn't it called
But
that? It's called Tetris Forever, right?
there was the Tetris Forever was the one that just came out, which was the history story one.
No,
And
I'm
the other one
thinking
is
of
Tetris Effect,
Tetris Effect. Okay. All right. Yeah. I forget the
which
types of games.
both of
But
them
I
were
swear.
phenomenal.
Okay. But you love that game, right? I'm
Oh
not
my
wrong
God,
in
I love
thinking
that
it's
game.
okay. All right.
That game transcends gaming for me. That's a Zen state. That's like a religious experience, man. It's like,
yeah.
but dude, if okay, even you listeners at home, go Google, go to YouTube and look up the history of the Tetris World Record. It is a 4-hour long something video that's a deep dive into the entire history of breaking the world record for like Tetris. And it is one of the most compellingly made videos I've ever seen because like my son watched it and my son played Tetris like twice in his life, but he was just like, I need to know who wins, the palm guy or the rolling guy. I'm like, yeah, we got to find out. Right. Like, I mean, these guys are going to levels of NES Tetris that have gone to the point where like the game has X amount of levels. Then they go beyond that. Then they go into the levels where the palette is no longer your friend, where like every few levels or something, the colors change in the rocks. And there's one stage or something where it's literally the Tetris pieces are falling so fast that you cannot humanly see them drop. And the color scheme is black, and gray. And you're just like, there's a blank screen and I have no idea. And they just have to use the outline shadows to try to figure out. And when you see like these kids who are maybe younger than the PlayStation taking these NES games and just tearing them, and it's like, this is one of the greatest, most triumphant videos I've ever seen in my life. And I'm just like,
video games have a very particular way of exposing how human beings can push expertise to its limits. And I love this battle. It's almost like the Paul Bunyan and the Ox, or not the Paul Bunyan and the Ox, but these tall tales of the man versus the machine, you know?
Yeah.
Of like, the conceit is this is a video game and there are limits because there is a code that constrains the structure and the game itself. And we continue to like find new ways to push that limit, even though we're pushing up against numbers in a database or whatever. It reminds me recently, last week, scrolling, I saw a dude hit FC of Through the Fire and Flames at 200% speed, you know, not 100% speed. And I remember when I Am Chris for Life hit it for the first time, 100% speed normal on his big, enormous CRT, you know, those huge ones that people had in their basements. So he hits it for like, that was a legendary video on YouTube, like 2008, 2009 or whatever. And now we're at the point where we can hit that song at 200% speed. So the point is like, I don't know, you could find that in all the speedrunning community of just how we are constantly kind of doing the impossible, and video games are a perfect like expose of that, of just someone that dedicates thousands and thousands of hours at mastering a technique or an approach or whatever. And sometimes we get those moments of gold when a record breaks, you know?
Well, it's like, I remember the first time in DDR, speaking of that, back in the day, there was the first time the 300 BPM bonus song Max 300 came out at the end of DDR Max, where you had to beat a bunch of levels and get like perfects and stuff to get this level to even happen. And you got 3 hits before the game overed on you. And there's stuff is dropping from the top as opposed to going from the bottom or whatever. And it's just like, you have to. I remember the first time I saw somebody beat that live, and it was one of the greatest moments. We were like, the whole arcade just blew up. We were like cheering, pouring sodas and giving them free beer. I mean, it was one of the greatest things ever. And then like maybe 2 years later, people are just using that as a warm-up song.
Exactly. That's the craziest part. Yeah. You can watch yes.
What?
Yeah. You can watch what we thought was first like impossible now become routine and even trivial, right?
It's great. It's almost like, it feels like you're watching technology evolve in real time. Like,
yes,
where, I mean, like I use the example of like, oh yeah, for my parents, the internet is this cloud mass that is off in the distance hiding the sun, and they're like, I don't know what's going on. For folks of you and my generation, we're in this fog of the internet. We kind of understand it. We're here, but we remember before the fog came. For kids like my son, it's the air they breathe, and they don't know what the world is like without this air.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like mastering technologies that we're still kind of using a translator to understand. And they're just natively in this space. And it's like when you see like, it's like when I watch like young people play Magic or whatever and doing these like crazy combos or these like big sick CDH decks that are like popping off in insane ways. I'm like, bro, I'm just swinging for damage. I don't know what you're doing. Like, I don't understand this world. You're like, get out of the way, old man. You know?
That's right. Yeah, buddy. We earn our gray hairs, you know, we really did.
I mean, I was thinking about you because like the fact that I remember you unearthed Dan. Well, I mean, Callahan and whoever, Braden unearthed Dan, and then you brought it to the world. Yeah. And then this time around, CGB is running a Dan tournament in friggin' Chicago. And I'm like,
yep.
God bless, man.
Here's what I'll say about the Dan story, because that's another moment of like, I was so stoked to do that story justice, because that story also goes back decades. Like Nick Floyd came up with that from a pile of draft shaft and crappy commons and uncommons that he had in his binder in the late 90s.
Wasn't I there when you got to play with him?
Yes. Yeah. And so here's what I'll say. Like, what Nick appreciates is that I always bring him up when we talk about Dan, because I also want my own crusade, or not crusade, but I'm determined to make sure that everyone knows Nick Floyd's name, because I want to make sure that folks, when they think of Forgetful Fish or Dan, they remember that it came from one dude who created the format. You know, it's important to me that his name is associated with the format forever. So yeah, and then meeting him obviously was the circle complete, right? Awesome to play.
I love that his first thought was like, "Hey, I've got 30 other formats. You want to?"
Exactly. That's all he wants. All he wants is like, yeah, everyone knows Dan, but you should play rock paper scissors. You should play, you should play the other formats I've made. So I have a couple of Dan that he signed. I was like, I gotta get again. I'm a fan of yours. You know, get away with all the rest of it. I can still be a fan of people. But anyway, that was the best part for me. It was like making sure I could tell that story well, and that folks would know Nick Floyd's name and the history of it, because it wasn't just this wasn't a recent idea, and it wasn't something that came forcibly. It wasn't engineered. Like, it was something that Nick Floyd had tried to promote and proliferate for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. And then finally it had its moment. So that's the best part of that story to me.
I remember showing Sheldon Dan, and he went and I tell him, I'm like, dude, we should play more Dan. And I think it was Scott Larrabee was like, what's Dan? And he's like, and Sheldon turns to him and he's got this really grumpy face on his, like, look on his face. And he goes like, do you remember in 1998 watching those miserable mono blue mirrors where people would take 7.5 hours to play a goddamn game? That is Dan. And I was like, Good Sheldon just flashing back to tournaments of like, this is the worst misery.
But I love that Sheldon said that, and I love that Scott and Sheldon were talking about that, because Dan is similar to what they made and what they kind of, you know, they proselytized a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are these naturally born things that come from the woodwork of the game. And there's so many stories like that. There's so many derivatives of that, or new ideas that are coming from Magic. That was the central thesis of that video, was like games within games. Like, we've given you the system, but we're going to find all sorts of new ways we can use the system in ways that we didn't even intend or expect. And someone's going to find something in Magic. I guarantee you the next 10 years of Magic, there's going to be the new version of Commander that isn't Commander at all. You know what I'm saying?
I think it's genius to, like, some people, like, it's funny when I talk to people about like Oathbreaker or Brawl or whatever, and they're like, oh, why would I want to play new formats? I'm just going to play Commander. I'm like, you know, Commander's not what Garfield intended either, man. Like, somebody came up with this. Like, I think the thing that keeps Magic so strong is the fact that we can take these infinite game pieces and then just remake any number of games with them. And it's just like super like cool. Like, my friend Ravi, who's he's not in the Magic community at all. He's literally just one of my buddies. And he created a game called Red Card Wins, where you've got a bunch of blue cards and a red card. And it's like a kind of mind bidding game where you're sitting there and you're like putting a card down. You're trying to hope that nobody else puts these cards down. And he created this whole thing out of just draft chaff that was just sitting around, like mountains and islands or whatever. And I'm like, we've got these cards. We're not fixed by the rules. We don't have to play what Virtel and Thomil did in Alpha Rulebook. You can do whatever you want with them.
Yep. Yeah,
and
yeah.
It just fills me with joy to see like every time, for instance, Nile comes out with like a new, or do you remember the thing on Arena that happened where people were playing the Bats game where they were building the decks? There's that one, there was this one bat from Ixalan or something where it's like you attack with something and they have to discard a card in your hand. And then you can add that card to your deck later on. So people were trying to climb the standard ladders to see how fast they could get to like 7 wins or whatever. And you start with a deck that got basically all lands and 4 bats. And you're just using these bats and building this deck. It got to the point that Aaron Forsyth was playing it, and he ended up playing a mirror match against somebody using this weirdo format on Arena. It was so much fun.
How did I miss all of this?
I don't know.
This is a Rhystic Studies video through and through.
This would have been you would have, you know what? I will send you the relevant
How
tweets
did I
and stuff.
miss this? Was this an
It was hella fun.
Was this recently? Like, what do you mean?
It was like a year ago.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
No way. How funny. See, again,
but it was just such a delightful little weirdo way to play.
And then the fact that there was maybe community rallying around it or support, or like folks playing into the bit, like choosing to do it this way.
Twitter leaderboards, the whole thing.
To like that's a cultural moment. That's that stuff you can't engineer. That's the stuff that comes naturally, like the wellspring of it. Yeah. And Magic's full of that all the time.
So I want to ask you, man, like you come up with these insanely artistic videos that involve deep dives of research and work. How do you decide? Like, you've hit all these major topics. Where is your new well of ideas coming from?
It's always from previous projects. I've said before that, like, it's always like I'm halfway through a project and something else pops up through the research of that. So it kind of is this self-perpetuating machine. It's curiosity. It's going to the cons and finding something new. It's a question mark sometimes on my side. Like, I've known distantly about this, this deck or this card for a long time. Like, one of my not white whales, maybe my pet project this year will be Doomsday. We were talking about Doomsday. I would love to do a deep dive on the Legacy Doomsday deck, because I also think Doomsday is like a one-of-one card in Magic.
Yeah,
there's a lot of like synonymous, like brothers, sisters, cousins types of cards, where you have like the centerpiece. This is the main mechanic or idea, and then you have derivatives or like riffs on that. There's probably 100 cards in Magic that are one of one, and Doomsday is one of those.
Yeah.
And that's what like is always churning around in my head. That's why I get irritable at the end of my projects, because I'm just done with them. Like, I hate video editing at this point, because it prevents me from doing the fun part, which is the research and the writing and the cultivating of the idea. So
this is why I have an editor, folks.
Yeah.
You, Dan. Thank you so much.
No doubt. Shout out to the editor. But I'm my own editor, so I have to drudge through the montage of videos. But yeah, it comes through that, and I always have my ears out. I listen to something I always recommend too is like getting out of the bubble, because I'll get ideas from other hobbies or formats from other hobbies. Again, mentioning the new video, like the new video was based on like the core conceit of UFO 50, that video game that came out recently. It was like, all right, that's 50 video games in one. I wonder if I could do 50 videos in one video, right? And so that's a little bit of this idea. So stuff like that, even Mark Rosewhite, one of Mark Rosewhiter's, like not infamous, but like often quoted pieces of advice or insights is just like limits breed creativity. He's always saying
breed creativity.
Precisely right. And when you're in a position like mine, I have to continue to create my own restrictions so that I can make cool stuff. The worst is like being out past the Mariana Trench and it's just the abyss of nothing. Like, I want some boundaries so I know where I should work within. And doing like a bunch of research over time, I have a long list of videos I want to do. And doing them allows me to make more of them, because I'll always find something weird that comes out of every little project. So, yeah.
I love that for you and for all of us, honestly, because like every time you have one of these weird ideas, I get a video about the Heirloom Minotaur jacket. It's like,
whoa, that was a cool rabbit hole, buddy. I loved living in that one.
That was so fun. I was like, oh my God, all the things. Because I remember, I realized for some of our viewers and most of your viewers were not around then, but for those of us who were, some of these things are just like weird eras of Magic, right?
Oh yeah. Like I got a binder of this kind of stuff. I have the Hurley right here. I bought a signed proof from Manson after the Hurley video.
Love that card.
Yeah, because it becomes a memento of sorts for me. Yeah, that's such a cool. There's also like layers and layers of storytelling in that video that are implied.
Yeah,
just about basically like this not disconnect, but this tension between Wizards of the Coast as a blossoming business and enterprise, creating like stumbling upon Fire. Basically, they made a new version of Fire, and them trying to keep pace with it and guessing at who was using the Fire. And Hurley was like, oh, they had an affection for Hurley inside the building, but outside the building, the players didn't care about it very much or whatever,
It feels like the earliest days of hermetically sealed, like we're inside this bubble and so everybody cares about this thing. It's like, no, dude, nobody cares about Heirloom Minotaur.
Yeah. And maybe that can be a bit of a totem for Wizards of the Coast at large and in perpetuity of like, yeah, we care about stuff in the building, but maybe the players don't care about it the way we do. Or the way that we think that they do, So to me, I always see that in Hurley.
Right. And like that, I see a lot of those, especially in the early jokes in the first mystery booster, things like Throat Wolf or whatever, where you're what the hell is that? But if you're old,
exactly.
It, right?
Yes. And
this?
Oh.
This is the Legends playtest original Jedit O'Jonin.
No way.
This thing
is it on an 8 of diamonds? Is it just on
it's on an 8 of clubs.
8 of clubs. All right.
8 of clubs. And it's on an actual playing card that they had taped. Because, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your playing, but I was thinking about old things. And me and Prof were in Star City, had invited us to come to Vegas last year for their event. And we were like the only content creators or whatever that were there. And it was 800 degrees and nobody had come. So we had a lot of time to just hang out. And someone came up to me and Prof and was like, hey, I just bought the entire collection of the guy who created Legends and the unreleased Legends too. Do you want to see it? And we're like,
way.
What do you mean? He's like, all the playtest cards? And he started pulling things out and he's like, here's Mana Drain. And here's like, Kobolds of Kirkkeep or whatever. I'm like, what the hell? And he's like, I'm like, do you got like Legends? He's like, yeah, I got Legends in here. It was like, he showed me like Dak and Blackblade. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I'm like, do you have Jedit O'Jonin? My boy Jedit O'Jonin. Like one card that I loved so much that I forced Ethan to recreate a brand new one, Jedit O'Jonin. He's like, let me look. And he pulls it out and it's this, warrior lady sitting on this sword with this sword on this bench thing made out of some clip art. Congrats on her transition, I guess. And it costs 6 UW. So it's like an 8 mana 5.
Well, no.
Oh, no. It was a 4 and then UW were the colors, right?
Yeah. 6 total, 2 of which have to be UW. Yeah. Those are the old playtest rules. But yeah. That's amazing.
But I was like, and so I was like, can I just buy that off of you? Because I'm the only one who cares. So now I have my 1 of 1.
So good.
And it's just like, those stories, like, we need to capture them before they disappear because this stuff is so cool.
Oh, it's so cool. And then the playtest cards, especially because ultimately, they are just copy pasted clip art onto like printer paper that was just fully like the same way I would write a note card of the stuff I have to do for this video next to me. Like it's just a quick note, like that's the playtest card,
Yeah.
But then they become these historic pieces because they offer a glimmer of insight into R&D or ideas from before, and they're also collectibles because they're 1 of 1. And then the extra layer of that is like, then you have to confirm their authenticity, and that's very hard to do. And there's certain buyers and sellers who are the real ones, and then there's like, then it's a whole ecosystem of buying and selling these old pieces of paper, right?
Yeah, but it's also, I think about the fact that this is the card that got me into Magic. when I was a
Exactly.
kid, seeing this
Exactly.
tiger with this amazing desert and this like warrior. And I'm like, I want to know what this person's story is. I want to know what this world is. I want to be here. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
being able to
Yeah.
see like being able to, somebody made this,
Yeah.
deliberately sat there and said, this person is going to be called Jedit Ojanen. This person is going to be a giant cat person. That there's this whole world that they created that then gave me this entryway into what became my life. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's just something about that. Like, look, as a priest and a Hindu priest, I am all about these chains that connect us back to our ancestors, right? Like these are things that are like these liminal rituals that we do that are the same as were done thousands of years ago on the plains of Pakistan and India and whatever, just like handed down note for note, line for line. And I think about the fact that this Jetta is like that. This is like the chain of connection between me and the creators of this thing that has become permeated into my life. And I don't know, maybe I'm just like old and nostalgic or poetic, but this is like, it feels like it's got a meaning to it that it wouldn't, maybe like other people are like, oh yeah, that's cool. But I'm like,
Right.
this is for me, it's just, this is this link.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I think anyone that has a bit of a romance in their heart about magic has that. And you'll find where folks over time prioritize cultivating that. Like recently Sullivan bought Dwarven Mines or whatever, that painting. And you know that Sullivan is the one person on the planet that cares about that card more than anyone else.
Right.
Because who's out there buying Dwarven Mines, right? So like, for sure, and that's true of anyone who buys magic art or procures these old playtest cards or buys like, I spent $100 on that Heirloom Minotaur pin. Like, why?
Yeah.
It's like, well, this has a history and it's a material artifact, and I think it has a weight and it has a presence. And magic is always achieved. One of Magic's greatest strengths is that it is a physical game. It's physical cards. And speaking again about us growing up in the internet, like we're coming back to like physical, we care about physical items. We care about the magic that they hold, no pun intended there.
Yeah.
But there is like the tangibility of cards, and the tangibility of these items has power to connect. What I've been thinking about is kind of the reverse of that, of how cards are not just like my specific copy of a card, less of that and more of like, this is also part of the, I keep pitching this new video, but it's really not that deep. Like the new video is just a video, but there's one moment I'm talking about Archaeomancer, and I thought about like, what's the mirror image of what I was describing? Like I cast Archaeomancer, but I wonder how many times everyone has ever cast Archaeomancer and everyone has a relationship with Archaeomancer. And so the card that I'm holding is just a connection to everyone else's card, Archaeomancer. Yeah. And so it becomes like this terminal, like that card specifically is tied to other people's memories, even though this one is mine that I'm holding in my hand.
I was thinking about Lawn War Elves in that same window of
wow,
just like,
really?
Because Lawn War is one of my favorite cards ever. I'm a green mage. You were the one who told me. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about, this Boros crap. You are a green mage through and through. And I was like, you know what? You're right. And it's the truest thing. But like, I cast a Lawn War this like at the con, and I was sitting there, and I used my beta because it's cool and it's awesome. But there's a billion Lawn Wars that are good. But I'm just thinking, like, how many things has that card pumped out?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
like, how many Lana Wars have been cast over the history of Magic that have just been like, oh, buddy, wait, the big thing is coming. And this dude is going to help me bring that worm to table, or that crater hoof, or that who the hell knows. But it's just like the fact that they reprint it in Foundations means that kids today can have that same experience. And I think that's so good. Like, I think I was talking to Carmen about this, and I'm like, the fact that you guys reprinted things like Mahamoti, Sarah Angel, Shivan Dragon, Lawn War Elves, Omniscience, or whatever, and you're giving a new generation of people this chance to join into our story in a way that gives them continuity. And it means that when they go back and they read some article about, LSV won, 16-0 in with an Elves deck, and he had a Lawn War too. And I'm like, you get this whole big connection and this just junction into this world.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important.
Llanowar, also by Anson Maddox, and
It's such a good card, man.
such a sweet card. And shout out to like the early design of elves. They were just kind of they wanted to do their own version of elves, and they're out.
They're all feral and crazy looking.
Yeah, they're like punk rock. Like all of them have mohawks and piercings and stuff because they were looking around early '90s Seattle, and they're like, "This is our culture." So I'm serious. This is in the documentation that the Llanowar elves are just based off of like the grunge, like culture.
Okay, well, there's a video you haven't done yet.
I know. Well, see, there's a million of those.
Where's my Llanowar, man? Like,
I'm full of all these esoterica about magic.
Yeah, but isn't that that's just, look, dude, I just find joy in esoterica of all kinds. I find,
of course,
immense joy in like having just random trivia of stuff because it's like, it's so great. I mean, I don't know. It's like, I bought a book and I read this book about how to make small trees, how to plant trees that don't get taller than like 4 feet tall. And so we dug this 2 foot deep hole into my front yard and planted 4 plum trees in this tiny little hole and then cut them off at like 15 inches. And this lady is like, I've spent 45 years learning how to make trees into basically miniature, like things that somebody's grandma could get off of a wheelchair. And I'm like, this is the greatest thing in the world. And you passed this knowledge on to me. And now I'm hacking trees and planting them in my front yard. Like, I don't know, dude. If somebody cares so much about something that they want to write it down, I am here to celebrate that, right?
Yeah, and it's also about trivia. I think gets a flattening connotation of just like, oh, that's a random fact. But I think part of always what I've wanted to do at Rhystic Studies too is kind of like contextualize what trivia is and kind of imbue it with why we give a shit about it. Because it is like you could just rapid fire a bunch of facts about magic to anyone who will listen, but it's like not just a bunch of facts about magic. Like every little tidbit of this trivia has an origin in something and the connection to something else, so.
One of my favorite things was like we at the PPR, they had us do Shivam and Wheeler with Callie video where they would basically flash random cards up and then Wheeler and I would sit and talk about it and then try to explain to this kid who's been playing for like 2 years, what does this mean? And like, well, some of these cards are just like old garbage from like Onslaught or from Stronghold or whatever. And one of the cards was Black Lotus. And obviously, Wheeler's like, Shivam, have you ever cast a Black Lotus? I'm like, of course I've cast a Black Lotus. And we're like, Callie, have you ever cast a Black Lotus? And she's like, no. And I'm like, do you know the difference between a mono artifact and a continuous artifact? And she's like, what do you mean the mono and continuous? Yeah, exactly. And it was just like, well, there was a time before the tap symbol existed.
Yeah.
And she's like, what the hell are you talking about? How is that possible?
And I'm just like, gosh, subtypes of early magic, like Enchant World, all of the weird reflections of old rules that weren't. A little bit of the video I did on ambiguity was hinting at that, and then Rosewater give his talk at Chicago, the 25 most influential cards in Magic. He brings up the Hive because the Hive was like Garfield's first attempt at making tokens, and how that that was a design that didn't exist and it created a new idea within the game. And now we take tokens for granted or whatever.
Right.
So from that, I was like, then I got an itch in my head about like, oh, what is the history of tokens? And you saw on Blue Sky maybe earlier this week, I tweeted out how like the first Magic tokens look like they're from a different game. They're so cool.
The
they're so
90s
dark
font and everything.
Oh my God, they have so much style. Like again, you can't engineer that. If they tried again now, it would just it would be a copy of it. But yeah, we take for granted that tokens are part of the game, but there was a moment where tokens had to be conceptualized.
Yeah, and you had to sit and write out on the card. This thing becomes a thing. Or like, and he expected you to use little like tokens or coins or whatever on the cards, because otherwise how else is Triskavite going to work, right? Where you're moving the thing out and moving it back to make it either a +1/+1 or a counter. And I'm like, that is such a, like, you could see how he's conceptualizing the way the card will look on the table by the way he writes the rules out, which you can't get away with these days, right? Like,
no, right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to leave you with one interesting tidbit. It's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make this all stories about me, people, but Sam understands. You've known me for too long, buddy.
I know.
So at the first night I got to Chicago, I ran into Rashad Miller, who is one of the all-time greats, one of the true legends of Magic. And like, for those of you who don't know, Rashad Miller is literally the guy who created the idea of putting Magic streams on the internet so we could watch.
Amazing.
Like one of the real, true hero, like unsung legends of our game. And I was sitting there, and we're in this game with me, Eric Klug, Rashad, and Samir Joseph, who's a new employee over at Wizards, and he didn't know who Rashad was. Wow. And I'm like, bro. And Rashad's like, I'm nobody special. And then folks and judges and everybody be coming up and like, oh my God, you're here. It's like, like the entire staff isn't going to come up to a dude who's nobody. And I'm like, yeah, well, he created the idea of watching Magic on TV.
So sick. Like, so sick. Yeah.
Or even, dude, you know how many people were, it was so funny this weekend because I'd be sitting with Eric Klug, literally the legend of altars, the god of making cards look like things. And nobody's ever seen him or knows what he looks like.
Yeah.
But he lives near me. So when we were in Chicago together, I was just like, oh yeah, this is my friend Eric. And he's like, hi, Eric. And they're like, oh great, what do you do? It's like, oh, I'm Klug Altars. And then you see their faces just kind of like, what?
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. That happens all the time. Some folks are not as visible and not in front of cameras all the time. I relate to that a little bit because I would, you
keep yourself offline. I mean, at least there's a lot of people out there who know your work who don't know what you look like.
Yeah. There is that. And I guess I just relate to the sentiment of not making yourself the prime feature of your work,
sure.
or the thing that folks will recognize you by, perhaps. And it makes sense for an altarist or an artist that would be the case. It's true. Like when you go to cons, you meet artists who you know their name, you know their paintings really well, and you meet them for the first time. That's a wonderful moment, putting face to image. But yeah, there's a lot of folks like that. A lot of folks who have not either received their song or their time in the sun, or folks know a lot about but have never met and wouldn't, And I think Klug is a great example of that. Of like, know him, but you've never seen him before.
It's like there were altarists who I was introduced. I'm like, oh, you're an altarist? Yeah, this is Eric Klug. He's my friend. And they're like, and it would be like, hey, nuns, this is the Pope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like that for sure. And then Klug is like, oh, this is the next generation, and then there's a generational difference.
He was so happy to see these people. I'm like, this is the joy that I want, man. This is like, I love when there's no resentment between this transition. When people know that, like, I had a moment and now it's these kids' moments. But when you're just so happy to watch them grow, it's like, I think that was my biggest takeaway from Chicago. Like, I was so, like, Vegas was a miserable con for me because the last Vegas was also the first one after the CAG broke up, the first one after Commander exploded. It was just a really emotional and upsetting time for me. This time, I was just like, I'm just here. I'm not committed to anything. I have no panels, no nothing, just this one signing I'm doing. And I'm just hanging out. And I just watched. And if people want to talk to me or come up to me, I'm here. You can do that. But watching people who I saw in fan lines coming to shake my hands 3 years ago, suddenly having their own lines, was just wonderful. It's like, I get that dad feeling now of like, oh, I'm so proud of watching my children grow up and leave.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I felt that too. And I'm glad that folks are getting more opportunities. It's being cultivated and encouraged from Wizard side, and there's more spaces to do your panels. Like, that stuff we wish we could have had, when we were in the cons before. But now folks are getting their own shows and their own signings and all that, and it's awesome. Like, that's the best thing ever. It's like to make more room for that, because there's a lot of room for that. It's not just like there's 10 paragons in the community and that's it. It's like, no, there's probably going to be 10 communities and 50 communities within the community soon enough, So
I don't know. It's just wild to me sometimes when I see like these giant tables of people who are lining up to meet somebody who I've never heard of before, who does content on a channel, like on a platform I don't own, for a format that I don't play. And I'm like, this is it.
Yep.
Like, I'm like, who is that guy? He's like, oh, they make CDH content on TikTok. And I'm like, that's a world I do not know at all.
I don't touch that at all. Yeah.
God bless, buddy.
Yeah.
I'm happy for you. Yep. And then they come up, but it's just like the same way. It's like, they would come up to me. It's like, oh my God, I love your show. And I'm like, you watch my show? It's like, yeah, that inspired me to do this. I'm like, Hell yeah. Because
Cool.
then I'm going to go turn around and go like run into like Frank Karsten or something and be like, I'm such a huge fan. And,
Yeah,
it's like, I don't know.
yeah.
The chain
Tracing the
continues,
lineage.
man.
Yeah, the chain
Oh, God, I love it.
continues. No
You know
doubt.
what? I wanted to pitch a project to you before you go, because
Okay.
there's a thing I've been wanting to work on or do something with for a long time, which is a history of Chandelar, the Microprose game.
Of course. This is on my list, and it's been on my list forever. And I've thought of you because I know you are a champion of that game.
I
It's
love
something that
that.
I've never played, but
What?
I know that everyone who plays it loves it. And Sid Meier is behind Chandelar, and I know you love Civ, so like it's all there. It's all
Brother,
there.
before this and after this, I'm going to be playing Civ 7, so I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, no, I know Chandelar. That's a project I've wanted to do for a while, so it's already been on my radar, and and I'm glad
Look,
that
until you've cast 5 time twisters in a row, you don't know how to live.
And I think it is for sure there must have been folks who got into Magic playing what we call Chandelar. It used to just be called, what was it, Magic the
Magic the Gathering by Microprose.
By Microprose. Okay. What I do is I read these old duelists, and you get ads for it here and there, these like full page ads for it. Super cool. Also a product that had a lot of aura and mystique to it. The closest I mentioned in the 7th edition video was the 7th edition starter kit. And I learned to play Magic with a tutorial like disc. And I bought it again. I was hoping to like load it onto my PC, but it's not compatible with like Windows 11, obviously. I would have to run Windows 97
You'd have
or
to do
98.
some tortured like emulation to make it work.
Yeah, I'd have to go backwards to play it, and it bummed me out because I really wanted to play it again, that old software. So pinched by time a little bit, but
that said, somebody has hacked Chandelar to make it work on modern systems, which is why folks like me can still play it today.
Exactly, right. And so you rely on the archivists or the translators of code to keep this stuff afloat, right? Because now there's generations that have passed that we can't have access to this. So
one day I want to introduce you to Frank Cifaldi, which if you don't know him, he is the guy who runs the video game archive, the video game
wow.
Basically, he's building a video game history foundation of like keeping alive like games as like early as the original, like where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego type of stuff, and just like all of the history of games and magazines and everything. And he's like full blown archivist and like data preserver, game preserver.
Yeah.
And I think you and him could have some very fruitful conversations because he's the kind of like, think about how hard it is to keep alive or to keep the data of an MMO or a living community that was like a BBS driven like mod. You're like, what is that even? How do you preserve that? What does that mean?
So I grew up playing EverQuest. I know all about it, and it's like there's also a resurgence in EverQuest because folks want to tell those old stories and preserve those stories. There's a need for it. People need this. And speaking earlier, I was speaking about Magic's greatest strengths is that it's physical. Like the cards they exist in perpetuity. Like they're still around. And imagine if Magic was only digital. Starting in 2005, we invented Magic the Gathering, and it was always a digital card game. How many stories would be lost intrinsically because it is an immaterial object, So I think that we luck out because you can go find that Legends playtest card because it still exists because it's real, and Magic still has the power to be real and it allows us to preserve our history a little bit easier than these video games who are running into big problems right now. So
the tangibility, like, I mean, that's the thing. Like there's a notion in Civ 7 of like, you're playing in eras. The first era, you've got one civilization, then your civilization falls and another civilization takes its place, and a third one in the modern age. And when you overbuild, so like your towns are the same, but the names have changed, and you build a new building on the old one, and sometimes you get a story moment saying, as they tore down this ancient temple to build the new foundry here, they discovered an ancient artifact of the old, Oxum dynasty. What stories does this deck of cards tell? And I'm like, that's only because of tangibility, man. Like when somebody tears down our digital future, that's the end of the story.
That's the end. Yeah. We're living in a
transient space.
A transient space, a Library of Alexandria that never had the chance to burn because it's not, it's not
right?
occupying a real spot, right? Yeah.
Oh man, thank you so much for coming on today, Sam. I love talking to you, and I'm sad that it happens so infrequently.
I can't believe it's already. Thank you. I can't believe it's already been an hour. This time flies. It's why I love talking to you. We could do this for 3 hours, no doubts. But
easy peasy.
Easy.
Like every conversation I have with you is always a pleasure.
Well, it's because it starts like the research projects. We planted 15 seeds here, and now we got to come back later and see what kind of 4-foot trees sprout from them.
It's gonna be sick. I'm gonna have so many plums. It's gonna be amazing, dude. I've got this thing set up now, so I will have plums from June through October.
Buddy, I love plums. Gosh,
that's so good. Plums. They're just like they're 4 different trees, and they're in a big circle, and they're just going to grow one after another, pollinate each other, and I'm going to have infinitely plums. It's going to be so good.
Oh my gosh, so tasty, the best.
But yeah, my friend, I guess if folks wanted to find you, where could they go? Assuming there's anybody in the world who doesn't know you. Jesus.
Search for me in the nearest rabbit hole. I'm about 15 layers in.
I'm gonna send you this article about pencils, man. I'm telling you.
Well, you sent me an article about fonts, and I read that whole thing about.
Wasn't that so good?
Unbelievable! That is amazing. That's the stuff. Yeah, again, that's exactly the center of the stuff that fascinates me the most, man. The history of the world through a weird font.
Right? Like somebody just like, here's a stupid industrial font that just exists and I hate it. I'm going to discover everything there's to know about it. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing I've ever read.
The coolest thing ever. I have all 50 of these cards about my next video right here. And they're just, everything is a story,
God, man, I cannot wait to see that. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
But as always, my friends, you can find me at Gearporty Gear. Well, not anymore, but you can find me at Shivam Bhatt on Blue Sky, or you can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are sold, or at YouTube every Tuesday. Thank you to my editor, Dan. You can also find me at Shivam and Wheeler, Love Magic, every other, Monday or something. And then you can also find me on the Chronicle of Dragonlance. And eventually I'm going to be starting a brand new podcast, and you will see that too. It'll be cool. There's like a couple I've got in the hopper, and I'm working on them, and hopefully we'll launch them sometime next year. It'll be fun. But with that, my friends, it's not magic without the gathering, and we'll see you next time.